What's up, storyteller? I'm Clark Rowanson, the Magic Engineer, and it's time to talk about magic. In this video, I'm going to be talking about one of the topics I actually covered in one of my live streams, so the format may be a little bit different than you're used to. I sure hope you still enjoy the content, and we're going to jump over to that right now.
All right, now I want to talk about how to figure out what your approach vector is. And if you haven't seen the other video, and for people watching live, yes, this is going to feel weird as I'm doing this pseudo presentation, but your approach vector is the direction you attack your story from. So if your story or your seed crystal or your magic system is a point on a map, then and you are heading from the north is your approach vector. Like you're coming from the north. And it's a little weird, definitely recommend the other video, but that's what approach vectors are. And I talked a lot about magic system stuff before, but I was also talking a lot about how this applies to more than just your magic systems, which I think you guys probably got from all of the examples. This applies equally across all aspects of your story. Because by necessity, if your approach vector is not a magic-centered approach vector, you're already building up a different aspect of your story. And this is also true for if you're doing any kind of game development, if you're trying to do any kind of new character for tabletop RPG, all of this stuff, it's worth poking around to understand. Now, part of this that is important, because don't get too worried about finding your single approach vector. There's a couple of ways. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So how do you find which approach vectors work for you? One of the first things you can do is I need to come up with a term for this, but if you lay out all of the elements of the story, character, plot, setting, theme, genre elements, and magic system, and you gave of any story, right? Any of the stories you read, and you gave them all a letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F. If all of the elements, if all of the elements except one were a C minus, and one, maybe two, was an A plus, which element would you want to be an A plus? Like, because if as soon as anything dips into the D range, that's the level where it doesn't matter how good everything else is. It's pulling you out of the story. You might be putting the book down. Prose. Prose is another one that we forget about a lot. But prose is a thing when it comes to stories. So I guess 7 elements. Of those 7 elements, what is the single one that if that was an A plus, all the rest could be a C, C minus? That's what hooks you. That's what keeps you going. That's what excites you enough that you will overlook not so great parts. Surprise, surprise, for me, it's magic systems. Like, that's a big part. If you have a good, interesting magic system, everything else can be a B, maybe C grade. And I will endure it. I'll probably in my head be like, about pieces, but for the most part, I will probably make it through your book. Another big one is setting. Setting is really big for me. If your world is interesting, I will go through a lot. Then characters are very important, but it's generally magic or setting as the primary ones. So, yeah, what do you want to be an A plus? And that will tell you a lot about what your preferences are, and that's always a good place for you to start. Because if a good character is what you need, like that's the one thing that people need to nail to keep you pulling through, then you should probably focus on that with your stories and your magic systems, is start there. And that kind of goes into the next thing, because these aren't always the same, but what do you like writing the most? And what do you like building the most? As you're working on your books and you're working on different aspects of it, you're working on the character, you're working on the factions, on occasion, just take a minute and think about how you're feeling. Very touchy-feely, woo-woo, but just take a second and say, how do I feel about what I'm doing right now? Is this really hard? Is this really fun? I hate this. This is awful. Or I feel like it could be fun, but I just don't get it. Use that analysis, and over time you'll see more, because especially when we're starting out, a lot of it is going to be hard because it's a lot of new. So don't let that convince you that you don't like something. But especially if you don't have a ton of works or a ton of completed works, just pay attention to how you feel, as you're working on pieces and as other people are talking about pieces. If it's something it's like, oh man, I really want to go do this now. That's what we call a clue. So if you're listening to writing excuses and they're talking about prose and you want to go off and do a bunch of prose exercises, that might be important to you. That one's a little hard because prose doesn't necessarily lead you into world building. But building a confidence in that and then doing some prose exercises on your topic matter is a way that you can do that. So if prose is important to you, pick up a writing exercise and focus on prose, but it is prose talking about the magic or prose talking about the world. And that might help you lead into it through this focus on thing you like, bringing something else in as a tag along. One thing I like to do when I have a chance to do this with people, it's an exercise that I call speed dating your story. It's for a very specific story, but it is a great fallback if you're struggling to figure things out. So like Ty, you mentioned you have a unique system, but you're not quite sure how to polish it. I don't know if you're struggling with the rest of the stuff that's going on, but the speed dating system really comes in two parts. You list out the main 6 elements of story, again, character, plot, setting, theme, genre, and magic, because prose is something you do. That's execution. That's not a component of the story itself. And give yourself a minute for each. Set a timer, and you have 1 minute to write down your favorite thing about each element. 1 minute per element. You can write down one sentence or just a couple of words. So your favorite part about your character might be a horrible villain's redemption arc. That's what you're excited to tell the story about. And the setting, it may be the fading Assassins Guild, or the booming, or the Assassins Guild that is being taken over, by the government, or something like that. And getting those individual pieces, your favorite part of all of these elements, that's part 1. Part 2 is then to take what it is you want to develop. So if it's your magic system, you take your magic, and again, giving yourself a minute, maybe 2 minutes, you then go through each of the elements again and think about how the piece you want to develop can connect to, enhance, and otherwise interact with this other part. So if you are telling a redemption arc of an assassin and you want to develop the magic system, and let's say the magic system idea is, I don't necessarily want to do shadow magic, but painting magic. Let's say it's painting magic, where like your core idea for the magic is that you can travel through paintings like in Harry Potter. So then you spend a minute exploring how you can connect a assassin redemption arc with painting magic, and think about that and try and come up with a connection and write down the connection. Then you move down to setting, where it's this Assassin's Guild that is being taken over by the government. How does that connect to the magic? And you go through all of them, all the 5, because you have your 1, and looking at how that connects, you're building stronger connections between the things you already like, and it gives you new ideas. It's an amazing exercise, and you can, I talked about doing it with magic. You could just as easily take that and use it to build a specific character or to really work on your theme. I love the speed dating exercise. It's great.
Hey, quick break. Just want to say, if you are enjoying this video, please do take a second to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. It helps tremendously. And that's all I've got. So back to the content.
The 6 elements, because somebody asked, are character, plot, setting, theme, genre elements, and magic. They're just the pieces we already know about story. If you can't remember them, just do what you can remember. The other one is experimentation, right? Just try it from one of the approach vectors and see what happens. And then try it from another one and see if that one was easier. And just giving yourself time boxing is incredibly valuable. So giving yourself 10 to 15 minutes to try it from one approach and see what happens. Also, reviewing what you've done in the past. I mentioned this a little bit ago, is if you have a bunch of seed crystals, take a look at your seed crystals and see if there's similarities. So mine are generally like a blank magic system where X does X. So viral magic system where your powers are most potent when you are most sick. Or organ magic where people, which is another one that I really, really want to write because it's disgusting, disturbing, and I freaking love it. Organ magic where people get magical abilities by grafting the organs of magical creatures onto themselves. So terrible. But that's me just looking at the magic. There's a little bit of implications for the world building and so on. Other people will say magic system where characters experiencing this can do this. That sort of thing. And you might see some patterns, and that can give you some hints. Also a thing to do to look at how you have brainstormed your stories in the past and trying to see, especially if you've done a couple, looking at seeing if you can remember how you started and where things really kicked off. That will help a lot. Okay, so that's how to find it. Now I get to go to this whole second part of the second part, which is don't get too obsessed trying to find your one holy grail, because it's going to change. Different stories will often require a different approach vector. And not only that, to get the best results, you don't just want two, or to get to your best results, you don't just want one approach vector. You want your top two. Because if you have your top two, you can basically triangulate on the thing you're trying to get. I mentioned magic. Magic is a big thing for me. But right after that, setting is very important. So if I know that my primary approach vectors are magic and setting, when things struggle, I can bounce back and forth between the two, and it will rapidly help me home in on what I want. So I have this concept about my magic system. What do I have in the world? What kind of world are we talking about? And I can bounce back and forth. So again, looking at the viral magic, the story I sort of have there. So I've got viral magic. What do I want? I want modern day. I want the magic to be new to the world. I want to deal with corporate setting that or a company that has been doing research into it. What kind of research has they been doing? What has their behavior been doing? What does the magic do? And it really helped me kind of home in on the concept of the magic and really start building out my story from there. One approach vector can usually get you to a thing you need. Having two will really help. Once you have two, I held up 4 fingers. Once you have two, all of the other pieces should start falling into place fairly easily. Once you have the two, you can generally figure out the rest by continually returning to further develop those two components. So like I said, for me, it's magic and setting or magic and plot, usually. Sometimes it's magic and character, but when I say magic and character, it's usually magic and character arc. So not the character themselves, it's more being like, what is the magic going to do for the journey they're going on, rather than me being like, this is how it's fundamentally part of who they are as a person. That my brain doesn't work that way. Another writer that I did a co-presentation with recently, Storm Humbert, he usually starts with like character and theme, or he thinks of it as character and argument, or he'll have like argument and setting. And those are the angles he comes from. And magic is actually one of the last things for him that gets developed as a result of what he discovers about these other two things. So, and then there's Stephen King, who, this is me just making a wild guess because I don't know the guy and I haven't read a ton of his stuff, because don't lynch me. I don't care for Stephen King stuff. Lots of people like it, not for me. Totally fine. From what I've seen and from interviews and other stuff I've read by him, he seems to be very much, his primary ones seem to be character and plot, mostly. You could argue that it's like a setting, or in case could even be like character and twist. But he has been quoted multiple times as saying that he starts by finding interesting characters and putting them through the ringer. So character, and then putting him through the ringer that is his plot. Like, that would be my guess on how he approached things. We want to look at Sanderson. Sanderson is probably close to myself, where it's magic and setting. And then he goes from there. And he starts poking around and be like, okay, this is a cool setting. This is fun. What would be some interesting stories and some interesting people here? again, I've met Brandon, but I don't know him like deeply personally or anything like that. I may be completely wrong, just from how he presents and where things seem to get the most focus in his stories. That would be my guess. Whew, okay, man, I got real excited. I was just going. That's those are a couple of ways on how you can find your approach vectors. And then just the last tidbit of consider if you can find your two primary approach vectors. Because if you can find two that are reliably at the top of your list, that's going to be a pretty solid start for basically any story. And once you have your top two most important ones for your story and your system and everything, it's usually very easy to build out the rest from there.
And that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was interesting. As always, you can leave questions in the comments below. I'm also going to leave some links in the description, so if you have some questions you want me to address in any of my live Q&As, or you have topics that you would like me to cover in these kind of live conversations, you can click those links, fill out the forms, and I will potentially cover your topic in one of these future live stream / video recordings. So thank you again, and whatever you do, make sure that you keep writing and stay awesome.